Eleanor Carter sat alone in her dimly lit, modest home in a small town in rural Ohio. The place was quiet, but it held within its walls decades of laughter, arguments, whispered secrets, and memories of family gatherings that seemed from another life. Her hands, worn from years of hard work, rested on her lap, occasionally brushing against her quilt, her most recent and perhaps final project. She had lived in this house for nearly 50 years, and the walls were thick with the history of her family, a family that felt like it was slipping away one piece at a time. Eleanor was once a mother, grandmother, wife, and sister, her life rich with the roles she cherished and fulfilled. But now, at 80, she found herself living a life she never anticipated, alone and estranged from her only son, Daniel. Their relationship, once close and nurturing, had unraveled gradually until it was reduced to a bitter silence. Eleanor replayed their last conversations repeatedly, searching for answers, hoping to understand why her son had cut ties so coldly. Her days were long and silent, each one blending into the next, marked by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the occasional sound of neighborhood children playing outside. Eleanor's heart ached with a loneliness she never expected to feel in her final years. She had always believed she would be surrounded by loved ones, especially by her son, Daniel, and his family. She had once imagined being an integral part of her grandchildren's lives, babysitting, telling stories of their family history, watching them grow and thrive. But that vision had faded, leaving only the dull ache of absence. Daniel, now in his late 40s, had grown distant over the years, focusing more on his career, personal aspirations, and his own family. Eleanor's hopes of being a grandmother who shared holidays, birthdays, and important milestones with her grandchildren were shattered when Daniel's visits became rare, eventually stopping altogether. Their conversations became fewer, more strained, and often ended in misunderstandings. The final argument, 3 years prior, had been the breaking point. Eleanor's words, though meant as concern, had been taken as interference, and her son had shut her out entirely. Since then, she had only seen her grandchildren in photographs, frozen, smiling faces that felt increasingly unfamiliar. The small town was a place where everyone knew each other, but Eleanor's pride kept her from sharing her heartbreak with others. On Sundays, she still went to church, her only regular outing, but even there, she felt a growing sense of isolation as she watched families sitting together, laughing, and exchanging warm glances. She often caught herself gazing at children as they ran past her, wondering if her own grandchildren would even recognize her if they passed her on the street. Friends from church would ask about Daniel and the children, and Eleanor would force a smile, mumbling a vague answer before changing the subject. Her closest friend, Martha, was perhaps the only person who had an inkling of her loneliness. Martha would visit Eleanor once a week, bringing with her a warmth and energy that briefly filled Eleanor's empty house. They would sit together, sharing memories of their younger days, laughing at things only they understood. Martha often suggested that Eleanor reach out to Daniel, but Eleanor, tired of rejection, would shake her head, unwilling to open herself to more heartbreak. Her routine had become a life of quiet resignation. Eleanor would spend her mornings knitting, reading, or tending to her small flower garden in the backyard. The flowers were her silent companions, vibrant reminders of life in a world that otherwise seemed colorless. She would watch as the seasons changed, her plants blooming and wilting, each cycle mirroring the inevitable passage of time. But as each day passed, Eleanor felt an underlying emptiness gnaw at her, a yearning for redemption and connection that she couldn't ignore. She often questioned her choices, wondering if she had made mistakes that drove her son away, if there was something she could have done differently. The weight of these questions grew heavier with each passing year, a constant reminder of a life filled with unresolved pain. The loneliness pressed on her, but beneath it, a quiet resilience flickered. Eleanor hadn't given up entirely. Even in her solitude, she found small comforts in her memories, in the delicate warmth of sunlight streaming through her kitchen window each morning, and in the lingering hope that one day she might find peace and forgiveness, not just with her son, but within age. Days passed in a monotonous rhythm for Eleanor, the silence of her home broken only by the sounds of her own footsteps or the occasional ringing of the phone, which usually brought only telemarketers or wrong numbers. Her world had shrunk down to the size of her house and yard, and although she'd managed to make peace with her loneliness, the pain of abandonment lingered, deepening with time. One autumn afternoon, Eleanor received a piece of mail that would open the wound of her estrangement all over again. It was a holiday card from her cousin Janet, filled with family updates, including photos and cheerful news of Janet's children and grandchildren. Janet's note included a casual mention that she had run into Daniel and his family at the local park a few weeks ago. The card read, "It was so lovely to see Daniel and his beautiful family. His children are growing up so fast. They're both smart and charming. Daniel mentioned they've recently moved to a lovely house nearby, and it sounds like they're doing so well. I can imagine how proud you must be." The words stung, each line pulling at Eleanor's deepest insecurities. Not only had Daniel moved closer, but he hadn't told her. He had relocated with his family within mere miles of where she lived, yet he hadn't reached out, not even to inform her of the change. The realization hit hard, as she felt not just forgotten, but deliberately left behind. Eleanor's thoughts spiraled into questions she had tried to ignore for so long. What had she done to deserve this? Had she been too strict, too demanding as a mother? She could barely remember the woman she'd once been, so involved in her family's lives and so deeply invested in Daniel's future. But now, all she could feel was a gnawing, unanswered sorrow. She clutched the card, her eyes filling with tears that she held back as best she could. She hadn't cried in years, not since Daniel's final rejection, when she had decided that she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing her pain. The letter from Janet reawakened memories of her last conversation with Daniel, replaying every word. It had been a simple phone call, one that started with Eleanor expressing concern about Daniel's choice to move his family across the country for a job opportunity. She had only wanted him to consider the upheaval it might cause for his children, the stress on his wife, and how such decisions could affect their stability. But Daniel had taken her words as criticism. Their argument quickly grew heated, and her gentle concern turned into defensiveness as she tried to explain herself. He had ended the call by accusing her of not respecting his decisions, of trying to control his life even from a distance, and had hung up abruptly. She hadn't heard from him since. The pain of that final moment stayed with her like a scar that refused to heal, and now, knowing he lived nearby but continued to ignore her, reopened the wound with fresh intensity. Her thoughts drifted back to the small moments, birthday parties, holiday gatherings, the meals she had cooked with love and care, the bedtime stories she had told him when he was little, the bandages she had wrapped around his scraped knees. How had all of those memories been erased so easily for him? She sank into her armchair, allowing herself to feel the weight of her sorrow. The depth of Daniel's rejection pressed down on her, making her wonder if she had any strength left to forgive him, or if it was too late for either of them to bridge the chasm between them. For the next few days, Eleanor retreated further into herself. The neighborhood children's laughter outside, once a fleeting comfort, now felt like a cruel reminder of the family she had lost. Even her friend Martha noticed the change, stopping by one afternoon to find Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table, her face drawn and somber. "Are you all right, Eleanor?" Martha's voice was filled with gentle concern. Eleanor offered a weak smile, her instinct to protect her pride. "I'm fine, Martha, just a little tired, that's all." But Martha could see through her friend's attempts to disguise the pain. After a few minutes of silence, Eleanor finally let down her guard, confessing the painful details of Janet's letter and the revelation that Daniel was living nearby. Martha listened quietly, her eyes softening with empathy. "Have you thought about reaching out to him?" she asked gently. "Sometimes family can be prideful, and maybe he's waiting for you to make the first move." Eleanor shook her head, her voice barely above ear. "I don't think I can take that rejection again, Martha. I've tried so many times. Maybe he's better off without me." Martha placed a reassuring hand on Eleanor's. "You're not alone, Eleanor. And remember, pride cuts both ways. Just don't close yourself off entirely. Sometimes the smallest steps can lead to something more." As Martha left that evening, Eleanor found herself staring into the fading light, wondering if there was even a path to take that small step toward healing, or if she would spend her final years in silence, her love for her son held tightly within, like a candle burning quietly, hidden from the world. Despite Eleanor's quiet resolve to carry on without her son's presence, Martha's words lingered in her mind like a seed trying to take root. But where was there to turn, she wondered, and to whom, when the one person you love most has left you behind? Eleanor had no siblings, and most of her cousins lived far away. Martha was her closest friend and, truthfully, her only confidant. Martha, a spry 76-year-old with a mischievous sense of humor and an infectious laugh, had been Eleanor's friend for over 2 decades. The two women had shared countless meals, holidays, and heartaches together. Where Eleanor was reserved, Martha was open, often coaxing Eleanor to share her thoughts, encouraging her to let down her guard. Their bond had grown over years of shared struggles. Martha's husband had passed several years before Eleanor's, and they had leaned on each other through both losses, developing a connection that ran deeper than mere friendship. Eleanor cherished Martha's companionship, but felt a pang of envy too for Martha's relationship with her own children. Martha's 2 daughters and their families often visited, bringing a joyful chaos to her home. They shared a connection Eleanor felt she had lost with Daniel. Yet Martha had a gift for never making Eleanor feel lesser or pitied, instead filling their conversations with humor and understanding. One evening, Martha invited Eleanor over for dinner. The invitation was welcome, offering a break from her routine solitude. Over a simple meal, Martha steered the conversation carefully, addressing Eleanor's feelings toward Daniel with a gentle frankness. "Martha, it's not that I haven't tried to fix things," Eleanor said, her voice choked, "but he doesn't want me in his life. That's the truth of it, and I have to live with that." Martha shook her head. "But Eleanor, you still care for him, don't you? Maybe you don't need to change him or even the relationship. Maybe you just need to find peace within yourself." Eleanor felt a strange relief in Martha's words, though they raised a question she wasn't sure she could answer. Could she really find peace without her son? In the days following her dinner with Martha, Eleanor found herself more pensive than usual. Martha's words had unlocked something within her, an inkling that perhaps the path to peace lay somewhere beyond waiting for Daniel to come back. But finding that path felt like a journey Eleanor wasn't sure she had the strength to take. Adding to her struggles, Eleanor faced another painful obstacle: her health. She had felt her strength declining steadily over the past year. What began as simple fatigue had grown into an unsettling weakness in her legs and arms. She had started avoiding the steep staircase in her house, unwilling to admit that she feared falling. Her once energetic steps had turned cautious, and her time tending to her beloved garden had dwindled to just a few minutes each day. One afternoon, after a particularly dizzy spell, Eleanor made her way to the local clinic. The doctor was calm but thorough, asking questions and ordering tests that left Eleanor with a new worry resting heavily on her mind. When she arrived home, she collapsed into her armchair, exhaustion and frustration washing over her. It was yet another reminder of how isolated she had become. There was no one to confide in, no one to help her if her health continued to worsen. The silence of her house felt suffocating, and Eleanor realized just how fragile her situation truly was. Her mind drifted back to her conversation with Martha. The idea of finding peace alone seemed daunting, almost impossible in moments like this, when the isolation amplified every ache and pain. But the alternative, spending her remaining days consumed by regret and waiting for her son's return, was just as unbearable. As she sat in the dim afternoon light, Eleanor faced a moment of profound realization. If she was going to find any kind of peace, she would need to seek it for herself, not from anyone else, not even Daniel. But how, she wondered, could she begin to heal a wound so deep, all on her own? The weeks passed, and Eleanor continued to grapple with her newfound awareness. Her healing would have to come from within. The idea both terrified and intrigued her, as she had always depended on others for her sense of self-worth and validation, especially from her family. Daniel's absence had left her feeling empty, as if her very identity had been stripped away, leaving only a shell of the person she once was. One evening, sitting in her living room as rain pattered softly against the window, Eleanor reflected on her life. She had spent so many years tending to others, first her parents, then her husband, and later Daniel. Her whole identity had revolved around caring for and supporting those she loved. She hadn't thought much about her own needs or desires, or what truly brought her joy. Staring into the dim light, Eleanor remembered her own youthful dreams, buried long ago under the weight of responsibility. She had once loved painting, spending countless hours sketching in the park or crafting colorful landscapes on canvas. But marriage, motherhood, and endless duties had erased that passion, turning it into a distant memory she rarely allowed herself to revisit. For the first time in decades, a longing to reconnect with that lost part of herself surged within her. It was a quiet but insistent urge to rediscover something that had once brought her joy. Eleanor realized that she had allowed herself to shrink over the years, sacrificing everything that made her unique and vibrant. Now, perhaps, she could take back a little of what was lost, not for anyone else's approval or validation, but for her own spirit. That night, Eleanor made a decision that felt small but monumental. She would try painting again. In the morning, she would visit the local art supply store and pick up a few items to get started. It was a modest goal, but the decision brought a sense of agency she hadn't felt in years. It was a first step toward reclaiming a life she thought was lost forever. Eleanor's decision to start painting again breathed a new kind of energy into her life. The next day, she ventured out to a small art supply shop on the edge of town. The shop's interior smelled faintly of paint and wood shavings, and Eleanor felt a strange mixture of excitement and vulnerability as she selected a few brushes, tubes of acrylic paint, and a blank canvas. It was a quiet yet powerful declaration that she still had something left to create. Back at home, Eleanor set up her materials on the small table by the window, where the morning light pooled warmly across the surface. She dipped her brush into the paint, the bristles quivering with color, and hesitated before the blank canvas. Her hand felt unsteady, and for a brief moment, she was overwhelmed with doubt. She questioned herself, wondering if she could really reconnect with the art she had left behind all those years ago. Yet, as she made her first stroke, something within her softened. The colors blended and transformed under her brush, reminding her of the life she had once envisioned for herself. With each stroke, Eleanor felt a sliver of peace settle over her, as though her brush were painting not just on the canvas, but over the wounds of her heart. But her quiet sense of hope was tested almost immediately. As she was finishing her painting one afternoon, the phone rang. Expecting it to be Martha, she answered, but it was Daniel. Her heart raced with a confusing mix of excitement and apprehension. "Hello, Mom," he began, his tone distant and guarded. They spoke in a strained manner, exchanging hollow pleasantries before he eventually said, "I just wanted to check in." The conversation was brief, devoid of warmth or apology. Daniel didn't offer any explanations or ask about her well-being. Instead, he mentioned his work and hinted at how busy his life was, leaving Eleanor feeling more like an obligation than a mother. When he hung up, Eleanor was left with an ache deeper than before, as if her son's call had reopened the wounds she was trying to heal. Yet standing before her painting, Eleanor realized something. While her pain had deepened, so had her resolve. She would continue on this path, painting her way toward whatever peace she could find, even if her son would never understand or acknowledge it. The days following Daniel's call left Eleanor feeling unsettled, the ache from his distance cutting sharper than she expected. But as she poured her emotions into her paintings, she began to see her pain in a different light. Each canvas became a way to express the words she couldn't say to him, the memories she wanted to share, and even the moments of joy she'd long buried under years of regret. Her brush became an instrument, not just of art, but of release. One evening, Eleanor took a step back from a piece she'd been working on, a landscape of the park where she used to take Daniel when he was little. The colors were soft, warm, and alive with hidden details she'd poured into each brushstroke. As she gazed at it, a thought struck her. She was creating a world filled with her memories, her love, and her own perspective. And for the first time, she saw that these creations had value, even if they remained unseen by others. This realization shifted something fundamental within her. Eleanor had spent years yearning for Daniel's approval, wishing for his presence to validate her life and her sacrifices. But as she looked at her painting, she understood that her own life was worth cherishing, regardless of his absence. Her worth, her joy, and her peace didn't need to hinge on his acceptance or rejection. That night, Eleanor wrote a letter to Daniel, not a letter to send, but one for herself. She poured out her heart, describing her regrets, her love for him, and the journey she was on to heal. She forgave him, not because he had asked for it, but because holding on to the pain was a burden she no longer wanted to carry. With each line she wrote, Eleanor felt lighter. She didn't need Daniel to change. She needed to release herself from the prison of her own grief. It was her path to peace, one she could walk on her own terms. As Eleanor continued her journey of self-healing, something unexpected happened. Her friend Martha, intrigued by Eleanor's newfound passion, suggested that Eleanor bring one of her paintings to the local community center, where an art exhibit was planned for seniors in the area. At first, Eleanor laughed at the idea. "Oh, Martha, these paintings aren't for anyone else to see," she protested, a hint of embarrassment in her voice. But Martha was persistent. "Eleanor, you've spent so many years giving of yourself to others. Why not let the world see this part of you? Share your story. Who knows who might be touched by it?" After a lot of hesitation, Eleanor decided to bring one of her landscapes, a painting of the park she once shared with Daniel. She felt a deep vulnerability placing it on display, a fear that others might see not just the painting, but the pain and love behind each brushstroke. Yet, as she stepped back to look at her piece among the other paintings, she felt a glimmer of pride. When the exhibit opened, Eleanor attended with Martha by her side. To her surprise, several visitors stopped to admire her painting. A few of them even asked about the story behind it. And as she spoke, Eleanor found herself sharing pieces of her life openly, something she hadn't done in years. One woman, moved by Eleanor's story, squeezed her hand and said, "You have such a beautiful soul. Thank you for sharing this part of yourself." Eleanor's heart swelled with a sense of worth and connection that she hadn't felt in years. That night, Eleanor returned home feeling a renewed hope. Her journey wasn't just about healing from the past. It was about finding herself again and perhaps creating new connections she hadn't thought possible. Eleanor's newfound hope was like a fragile flame, flickering with each day she painted and shared her work. However, as her art began to garner attention, she encountered an unexpected complication. Word of the art exhibit had reached Daniel through a family acquaintance who casually mentioned seeing Eleanor's painting at the community center and how proud she must be of her accomplishments. A few days later, Eleanor received an abrupt phone call from Daniel. His tone was sharp, almost accusing. "Mom, I heard about this art thing you're doing. Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, leaving Eleanor momentarily speechless. She tried to explain that it had been a small, personal project, something she had done for herself, but Daniel seemed more irritated than understanding. "Look, Mom, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish with this," he continued, his voice cold. "But I think it's strange. Do you really need to broadcast our family history to strangers? It feels intrusive." His words stung, turning Eleanor's pride and joy into something tarnished. The conversation left Eleanor shaken, her confidence unraveling as doubt crept back into her mind. For the first time since she'd started painting, she questioned if she had made a mistake, if perhaps her art had exposed more than she intended. She wondered if Daniel would ever see her work as an expression of her love and resilience rather than a betrayal. That evening she sat quietly in her living room, feeling as though the walls were closing in on her. Her progress felt fragile, as if one misunderstanding could erase all the strength she had built. Eleanor realized that true healing wouldn't come easily. It was a road marked by setbacks, but she reminded herself that she had chosen this path for herself, not for Daniel or anyone else. Her resolve deepened despite the pain. The days following Daniel's call were difficult for Eleanor. His words echoed in her mind, clouding the pride she'd felt about her art. Yet, in the midst of this inner turmoil, her friend Martha remained a steady presence. Sensing Eleanor's distress, Martha arrived at her door one afternoon with a warm smile and a determined look in her eye. "Eleanor, you're not facing this alone," Martha said firmly, setting down a basket of muffins and settling into Eleanor's living room. "You have people here who care about you and who admire the courage it took to put your heart into those paintings." She spoke with such conviction that Eleanor felt her doubts begin to ease, if only slightly. As they talked, Martha revealed a surprising plan. "There's a group of women at the community center who loved your work," she said. "They meet every week to paint and chat, sort of an art and support group. They asked me if you'd like to join them, and I think it might be just what you need right now." The thought of joining a group, sharing her story and process with strangers, felt intimidating. But Martha's encouragement made Eleanor consider the idea seriously. She knew that her friend was right. Opening herself to others could strengthen her against the sting of Daniel's criticism. The following week, Eleanor attended her first meeting with the group, feeling both nervous and strangely excited. The women greeted her warmly, eager to hear about her journey with art. As she spoke, she felt a sense of relief and understanding that had been missing from her life for years. These women understood the trials of family, the heartaches of aging, and the yearning to be seen. With each meeting, Eleanor felt a renewed strength, bolstered by the empathy and encouragement of her new friends. They reminded her that her voice, her experiences, and her art were valid, and that she was valued. She no longer felt as though her journey was something she had to bear alone. She had found allies who shared her path. With the support of her new friends and the stability Martha provided, Eleanor's self-confidence continued to grow. Week by week, she felt a quiet power taking root inside her. Painting had not only become an outlet for her emotions, but a way to reclaim the parts of herself she had long buried. Surrounded by women who encouraged her, Eleanor began working on a new, deeply personal piece, a self-portrait capturing the resilience she had rediscovered. Yet, as she painted, Eleanor sensed an unfinished thread in her life. Each brushstroke revealed her strength, but it also reminded her of the unresolved pain with Daniel. She knew that confronting him might reopen old wounds, but she also understood that it might be the only way to finally find peace, no matter the outcome. For the first time, she felt prepared to face him, not with demands for an apology or explanation, but with a quiet determination to make her voice heard, to share the truth of her experience without fear. She rehearsed what she might say to him, often talking to herself in the solitude of her home. Her words were gentle but firm, expressing the hurt his absence had caused and the love she still held for him, despite everything. She knew she would have to approach the conversation with patience and understanding, aware that Daniel might never fully see things from her perspective. Her journey had taught her, however, that healing sometimes meant speaking her truth, regardless of the response. In the days leading up to her planned conversation with Daniel, Eleanor felt both anxious and prepared. She strengthened her resolve by spending time with her new friends, listening to their own stories of family struggles and reco. Their faith in her gave her the courage she needed to move forward, ready to confront her son one last time with a heart open to whatever lay ahead. Eleanor arranged to meet Daniel in a small coffee shop, choosing a neutral, quiet space where they could talk without interruptions. She arrived early, her hands clasped around a warm mug, gathering her thoughts as she watched people pass by outside the window. The years of hurt and questions bubbled to the surface, but she reminded herself that her goal was not to seek blame or answers, but to express her heart honestly with the resilience she had found within herself. When Daniel arrived, he appeared tense, his body language defensive. Sitting across from her, he offered a brief greeting, avoiding her gaze. For a few moments, silence hung between them, thick with all the unspoken words that had accumulated over the years. Eleanor took a deep breath, calming herself before she spoke. "Daniel," she began softly, "I know things haven't been easy between us, and I want you to know that I'm not here to criticize or judge. I just want to share my heart with you, and I hope you'll listen." Daniel shifted in his seat, but he nodded, signaling her to continue. Eleanor's voice was steady as she recounted her loneliness, the heartbreak of feeling shut out, and the pain she had carried since he'd distanced himself from her life. She spoke of the years she had spent longing for a connection with him and his family, and of her journey to find meaning again through painting. "I've come to realize," Eleanor said gently, "that I can't hold on to what's out of my control, but I want you to know that my love for you has always been unconditional, and that love doesn't go away, even when things are difficult." Daniel's expression softened, a hint of regret in his eyes. "Mom, I didn't realize how much this hurt you. I thought you were fine, that you wanted things this way too. I guess I was just too wrapped up in my own life to see it." The honesty of his words surprised Eleanor. She could sense a crack in the wall that had stood between them for so long, a flicker of understanding in his voice. The silence that followed wasn't heavy with resentment, but with a quiet acceptance of the years lost and the possibility, however faint, of healing. In that moment, Eleanor felt a wave of peace wash over her. She had spoken her truth, and Daniel had listened. Whether or not their relationship would fully mend, she realized she had already found the redemption she'd been searching for, not from Daniel, but from within herself. In the days following her conversation with Daniel, Eleanor felt lighter, as if a weight she'd carried for years had been lifted. Her words had not erased the past, but they had allowed her to close a painful chapter with grace. For the first time, she could look at her life, its hardships, losses, and even her mistakes, and feel a sense of acceptance. She had finally spoken her truth, not out of anger or longing, but with the calm understanding that her own healing was within reach. Daniel, true to his promise, began to make small gestures of reconnection. He called occasionally to check in, his voice softer and more genuine than it had been in years. Eleanor noticed a change in him, a hint of empathy and awareness that hadn't been there before. He even arranged for her to meet his children, her grandchildren, for a casual lunch at a nearby park. The first time Eleanor met them, her heart raced with both excitement and nerves. She had only seen her grandchildren in photos, their faces frozen in time, growing up without her in the background. But now, as she watched them run up to her, laughing and full of life, she felt an overwhelming surge of joy. In their bright smiles and curious questions, she saw glimpses of her own son as a child, and she felt as though she were reclaiming a part of her life that had long been lost. This reunion marked a turning point for Eleanor. She realized that her journey toward redemption was not only about her son's acceptance, but also about reconnecting with her own sense of worth, her strength, and her identity. Her past, no longer defined by regret, now felt like a story of resilience. Her paintings became even more expressive, filled with vibrant colors and themes of renewal. Each canvas told a story, not just of loss or pain, but of survival, growth, and transformation. Eleanor saw herself in her work, a woman who had weathered life's storms and emerged stronger, a person who had found the courage to forgive, not only others, but also herself. After the first meeting with her grandchildren, Eleanor felt a joy she hadn't experienced in years. Her time with them was brief, but it left a profound impact on her, renewing her hope for a lasting connection with Daniel's family. The visit also brought a fresh wave of reflection as she began to consider the consequences of her journey and the lessons it had taught her. With every passing day, Eleanor found herself thinking not only of the past, but of the present, appreciating small moments she once overlooked, the warm sunlight on her porch, the peaceful mornings with her coffee, and her afternoons spent painting. She understood now that life's value wasn't just in relationships with others, but also in the simple, quiet contentment of self-acceptance and gratitude. However, she was aware that reconnecting with Daniel and his family wouldn't erase the years they had missed together. She still felt a sadness for the time lost, birthdays uncelebrated, and memories unmade. Yet, rather than dwelling on what couldn't be changed, Eleanor saw an opportunity to cherish each new memory, knowing that any progress, no matter how small, was a victory. In her newfound clarity, Eleanor began to forgive herself for the mistakes she had made as a mother. She recognized that while she hadn't been perfect, she had always loved deeply, and that love remained unchanged even through years of distance. Accepting her imperfections allowed her to feel at peace with herself and her past, knowing that she had done her best with the wisdom she'd had at each stage of life. This inner forgiveness brought Eleanor a sense of closure she hadn't anticipated. She no longer felt weighed down by regret, but lifted by a quiet strength that radiated from her core. Her art continued to flourish, each piece reflecting her evolving spirit, a spirit no longer tethered to the past, but free to embrace the beauty of each present moment. As time passed, Eleanor's bond with her son Daniel and her grandchildren slowly strengthened. She saw them more frequently, each visit dissolving some of the lingering tension between her and Daniel. These moments weren't without challenges, but Eleanor approached each one with patience, mindful of the delicate nature of their here. One evening, after dinner at Daniel's home, he offered to walk her to her car. As they strolled together under the fading light, Daniel paused, his face softened by something unspoken. "Mom," he began, his voice low and thoughtful, I realize I've hurt you by keeping my distance. I'm sorry for all those years you missed with the kids and with me." The words were a balm Eleanor hadn't realized she still needed. She squeezed his hand gently, her heart filled with gratitude. "We can't change the past, Daniel," she replied, her voice warm and reassuring. "But we have now, and that's more than enough." This exchange brought a sense of closure Eleanor hadn't expected. For the first time in years, she felt her relationship with Daniel wasn't defined by pain or longing, but by a shared commitment to a new beginning. They had both changed, each in their own way, and together they were ready to create memories that honored that growth. Eleanor's final years unfolded with a quiet but profound joy. She continued to paint, her work celebrated at local art shows, and her story of resilience becoming an inspiration within her community. Her life had transformed into something she once thought impossible, a life where she felt whole, loved, and at peace. In her last months, Eleanor reflected on the journey she had taken, the heartache, the loneliness, and the unexpected path to forgiveness and fulfillment. She realized that in rediscovering her own worth, she had unlocked a love for herself that was just as vital as her love for others. When she passed, her paintings remained, a vivid, lasting testament to the courage it took to heal from within. For those who knew her story, Eleanor became a symbol of hope, proof that redemption could be found at any age, that love could persist even after years of silence, and that healing was always possible, no matter the scars left by time.